We have to call out China when it makes these, when it commits these human rights violations, in great contrast to the sanctions that China has placed on honourable and right honourable members. The sanctions that we, alongside our international partners, issued were thought out, took some time to deliver, but had a legal basis to them, contrary to the recent sanctions that we've seen from China and our colleagues.
Lily Link. Janet Dalby.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would also like to put on record my thanks to the Speaker for granting this urgent question. The Foreign Secretary has described what is happening in Xinjiang as barbarism we had hoped lost to another era. The growing evidence of Uyghur Muslims being repeatedly violated and used as slaves to farm cotton is indeed barbaric. So when will this House be presented with legislation from this government firming up Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act so that all companies have a responsibility to prove that their supply chains are free of forced labour and to reinforce sanctions for non-compliance?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question and for her support of this government policy that will be coming forward to the House. The evidence of the scale and the severity of the human rights violations being perpetrated in Xinjiang against the Uyghur people is far-reaching, and I'm sure she will agree paints a truly harrowing picture. And we're all looking forward to hearing those further measures, but be under no doubt that this government will be taking action on measures to ensure that slave labour is not used in any of the United Kingdom supply chains.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that we should not just stand in solidarity with those members facing sanctions in this House, but all those lawmakers and others who have faced sanctions for speaking out against China in the United States, Canada and the EU? We will not be silenced.
No, my honourable friend for Stoke is right. We've made it clear that we regard China's attempts to silence those highlighting and shining a light on human rights violations in Xinjiang are unwarranted, they're unacceptable. We stand in solidarity with all those sanctioned by China. We are in close contact with the United States, Canada and our European partners who have also had citizens or entities sanctioned.
Vivi Link. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Have we not now reached the point where the Minister should confirm that the government will not countenance any form of trade talks with the People's Republic of China while it continues to sanction UK citizens?
I'm not aware of any formal trade talks towards a formal trade partnership with China currently taking place, but we have to be absolutely clear-eyed about this. We must cooperate with China, but we will not be held back from shining a light on human rights violations.
Lord Butler.
Mr Deputy Speaker, freedom of speech is a fundamental part of our British democracy. Can my right honourable friend confirm that he unequivocally supports the right of members of this House to criticise China over human rights abuses? And does he further agree with me that it is our duty to draw attention to outrages perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang and elsewhere whenever we learn of them?
Well, the honourable member for Aylesbury, again, is absolutely right. That's the fundamental difference between our two countries, is that parliamentarians in the United Kingdom do have the ability they've got freedom of speech, they are allowed to raise issues in this place and outside without fear or favour. And that is the fundamental difference that China doesn't seem quite to understand. Their attempt to silence those highlighting violations in Xinjiang not only is frankly ridiculous, it's unacceptable, unwarranted, and we've made clear, the Prime Minister has made clear, the freedom to speak out for parliamentarians to speak out in opposition to human rights violations is fundamental, and that's why this government stands firmly with all those who have been sanctioned.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Chinese approach to geopolitics is grim to behold. At the United Nations, scores of countries have signed up to China's distorted view of human rights. So can I ask the Minister, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what is the UK doing at the United Nations to build an alliance that will take on China where it needs to be taken on?
The honourable member raises a good point, and we do work. And this year, as we've heard, is a big year for the United Kingdom on the multilateral stage. And we have built alliances to be able to get to 38 countries supporting our statements last October in the UN, to pull together a caucus, an international caucus, a number of countries that has risen from the early 20s to late 30s in number, is by no means a small achievement. And the ability also to work with international partners, every country in the European Union, the United States and Canada, to deliver the announcement the other week in terms of our global human rights sanctions, I think is a significant achievement in that regard.
And the final question, Bob Blackman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks and tributes given to the late Cheryl Gillen, the late member for Chesham and Amersham. She was a dear friend and we'll sadly miss her. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the members who've been sanctioned by the Chinese, be they honourable or right honourable members, are heroes of this Parliament for speaking up for free speech? And is this not just nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to distract the public from the horrific crimes that the Chinese government is committing not only against the Uyghurs, but also other minority communities in China?
Well, can I firstly start by agreeing wholeheartedly with his remarks about our former colleague, Cheryl Gillen. I was her whip for a time when I first became a whip. I hadn't realised, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that Cheryl had also been a whip and she knew how the game worked. And she very politely reminded me of that. And I remember her telling me that if you need to be bothering me, Nigel, over this particular vote as a former whip, then you really are in trouble as a government, and she'll be sorely missed. But I can tell you, I wholeheartedly agree also with my honourable friend's comments about, is this a thinly veiled attempt to distract attention from the horrific crimes? Well, of course it is. I would agree 100% that we must not let this action by China distract from those horrific violations taking place in Xinjiang. We will continue to work with our international partners to send the clearest possible signal that the international community has a collective willingness to act.
And I shared a room with Dame Cheryl for a period of time, and it just shows the strength of Dame Cheryl that she was able to put up with me for so long. And we sat on the Council of Europe together, and Dame Cheryl, we are going to miss you greatly. I'd like to thank the Minister for responding to the urgent question, which, as the Speaker intimated, hits at the very heart of the democracy in this country. We're now going to suspend for 3 minutes. Order! Order. Order. I call Brandon Lewis to make a statement.
With permission, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement to update the House on the recent disorder in Northern Ireland. The main areas of unrest have been specific parts of Belfast, Newton Abbey, Carrickfergus, Ballymena, Cookstown, Coleraine and Londonderry. The 7th and 8th of April saw an escalation in the violence at an interface area, commonly referred to as a peace wall in West Belfast, with missiles being thrown by large numbers of mainly young people over interface gates and police coming under attack. As a result of the unrest, a total of 88 police officers have been injured, 18 arrests have been made and 15 individuals charged. My thoughts, and I'm sure everybody in this House's best wishes, are with those police officers. On Friday the 9th of April, the incidence of public disorder significantly reduced compared to previous evenings. There was, however, localised disorder in North Belfast. The remainder of the weekend and since has been much calmer, with only a few isolated incidents of disorder. Mr Deputy Speaker, the violence witnessed last week is totally unacceptable. Attacks on police officers are utterly reprehensible. Those engaged in this destruction and disorder do not represent the people of Northern Ireland. It is tragic and deeply concerning that young people have been engaged in and encouraged into this violence, and as a result will now end up with criminal records. It can be easy to look for a simplistic explanation for the recent disorder. However, it is clear that the factors behind it are in fact complex and multifaceted. People are frustrated after a year in which coronavirus has challenged all of us, and I do recognise how frustrating it's been, especially for young people in Northern Ireland, facing the uncertainty around lifting lockdown restrictions without having a clear roadmap in Northern Ireland. There is also a perception that the rules and restrictions have not been enforced equally in Northern Ireland, and we all know there are strongly held political views within and between communities that can be in tension with each other. And I recognise that there are concerns about the implications of the Northern Ireland Protocol, concerns which overlap with wider questions about national identity and political allegiance, and that comes at a time of economic uncertainty caused by the pandemic. Northern Ireland has made huge strides over the last 2 decades, but it is a post-conflict society and there do remain elements of fragility. Some sections of the community feel that their concerns are not understood. The reconciliation, equality and mutual understanding between the communities and traditions envisioned in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is not recognised or experienced by all. There is still work to do. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement, 23 years ago now, highlighted the importance of progress in areas of social development such as integrated education. These will be a vital part of Northern Ireland's future, enabling even more young people to grow up in the reality of a shared society and able to effect positive change in their communities. But the answer to all of these issues and any others lie in dialogue, engagement and the democratic process, not through violence or disorder. It is incumbent on all of us engaged in political discourse to support Northern Ireland in leaving its divisive past behind and continuing instead to look ahead to all of the opportunities of the future. Mr Deputy Speaker, policing and justice matters are devolved under Strand 1 issues under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Despite this being a devolved matter though, the Government has an important role to play in supporting the Executive to ensure that calm prevails and in offering the Police Service of Northern Ireland and all those committed to dialogue and democracy our fullest possible support. I have continued to meet with Northern Ireland's party leaders and the Police Service of Northern Ireland over recent days to discuss the unrest. Our collective priority is to work together to ensure public safety. I very much welcome the statement from the Northern Ireland Executive itself on the 8th of April that set out a common position from all executive parties against the violence and declared their support for law and order and policing. And I want to express my gratitude to them for their efforts and to the PSNI for continuing to work to keep people safe. I also welcome recent statements from many across the community and beyond, condemning the violence and appealing for calm. The Government respects the right to protest, but it must be done in a peaceful manner that fully respects the rule of law. The 10th of April marked 23 years since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, an achievement of which the people of Northern Ireland are justifiably proud, and on which we can continue and must continue to work closely with the Irish Government as co-guarantors of that agreement. In that time, there has been a transformative change in Northern Ireland. Peace has brought stability and opportunity. It has enabled Northern Ireland to develop into the vibrant, exciting place that it is today. Mr. Speaker, this government is resolutely committed to peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. We have invested significantly in a wide range of programmes and initiatives to that end. That Belfast Good Friday Agreement provided the foundation for peace and a framework for prosperity. And we are committed to it. I think everybody in this House is. All of us across this House have a duty to support the people of Northern Ireland in shaping a peaceful and prosperous society for the future, a future that they can shape. I've seen firsthand an inclusive, prosperous and hopeful society that continues to build on that hard-won peace. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must all work together to resolve the tensions that are currently being faced. I know from my ongoing engagement with stakeholders, including the Irish Government, that this is a shared view. The only way to resolve differences is through dialogue, and in that regard, we can all and must all lead by example. I commend this statement to the House.
Louise Haigh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Mr. Deputy Speaker, 23 years ago this week, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was signed. The violence in recent days, some of it carried out by children with no memory of the dark days of the past, has been painful to witness. Our thoughts are with those injured, and our deep gratitude belongs to the police, community workers and leaders on the ground who have helped restore some sense of calm in recent days. The violence was unjustified and unjustifiable. Those adults cheering on youngsters showed a sickening disregard for their children's futures. But recent months have shown just how fragile the peace is, and that it requires responsible and careful leadership to safeguard. As the Secretary of State has outlined, there are complex and varied factors behind the causes of the rioting. Disrupted paramilitaries lashing out at the police, anger at the way in which the Bobby Story funeral was handled last year. But there is also a very deep sense of hurt and anger amongst the unionist and loyalist communities, which has been building for months and which must not be ignored. The Prime Minister made promises to the people of Northern Ireland that there would be no border with Great Britain, knowing full well his Brexit deal would introduce barriers across the Irish Sea. He made those promises because he knew economic separation would be unacceptable to the unionist community. And the growing political instability we are seeing has its roots in the loss of trust that this caused. Trust matters. It is what secured and has always sustained the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. In moments of instability, what Sir John Major and Tony Blair, what Mo Mowlam and the Right Honourable Member for Skipton and Ripon understood, Labour and Conservative, is that trust, leadership and partnership are paramount to finding a way forward in Northern Ireland. As a co-guarantor to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the Prime Minister owes it to the people of Northern Ireland to restore the trust he has squandered. He is not a casual observer to these events. He must step up and urgently convene talks with the political parties in Northern Ireland and all parties to the protocol to find solutions and political agreement. So can the Secretary of State outline when the Prime Minister is planning to travel to Belfast to convene talks and show the leadership this moment demands? What is the strategy for addressing the loss of trust amongst the unionist and loyalist communities to demonstrate that legitimate grievances are being heard? How are representatives of Northern Ireland being brought into the negotiations on huge decisions affecting their future? And can the Secretary of State detail, I've asked him many times from this dispatch box, what practical solutions the government are seeking with the EU to reduce checks and requirements between Britain and Northern Ireland? Fundamentally, the people of Northern Ireland must see that politics can work and that the word of politicians can be trusted again. In closing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, recent weeks have starkly demonstrated that peace is an ongoing process. It is no coincidence that violence has flared in areas of profound deprivation, where educational attainment is too low, paramilitary activity 23 years on from the agreement, still criminally high, where children are educated in segregated schools and grow up in segregated communities. For them, the promise of peace has not arrived. A toxic combination of deprivation and disregard has fueled deep disillusionment. But we must believe there is still a deep urge for a future where reconciliation walks hand in hand with social justice. We saw that in the courage of communities along the interface in Belfast this past week. We must now see political leaders match that courage. This moment must mark the end of an era where Northern Ireland has been relegated to little more than an afterthought and the promise of peace allowed to stall. It demands a collective renewal of our commitment to the agreement and the principles which secured it. It demands that the vacuum of leadership and strategy that Northern Ireland needs is now filled. The Prime Minister must face up to the consequences of his own actions and show the leadership communities are crying out for.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the Honourable Lady's condemnation of the violence and support for the PSNI and others, and her words around the social fabric structure issues in Northern Ireland, which I think we have sounds like a very shared view on. I think she's right, as I outlined in my opening remarks, particularly when we think about things like the failure to see the delivery of integrated education, for example, that was outlined in that back in 1998. I think that is one of the areas we need to work on. And we do need to recognise that there are people in these communities, and this is why the government's programme of work around levelling up and the investment in city and growth deals and other areas is so important to make sure that people can see the benefit of what is happening and the opportunity moving forward in a positive way. She's absolutely right as well. I agree with her and her comments around the unionist community and the loyalist community. It's one of the things I think is so important about ensuring that our friends and the partners in the EU do come to fully understand this issue around identity that people feel so passionately and rightly so in Northern Ireland in the unionist community, and the impact that the decision around Article 16 had and the lasting impact that that has had for people in that community. I welcome the fact that the Vice President, Maroš Šefčovič, met with civic society and business leaders some weeks ago now, and I would encourage him, and I hope he will, as he has pledged to do, much more of that to fully understand. She outlined and referenced a few times around the protocol, and as I noted, as I just outlined actually, the issues around the protocol certainly do have played an issue in the terms of the tensions to the loyalist and unionist community. That's why I myself and the Prime Minister have been very clear about our determination to deal with those issues, to find a way forward. And we all obviously remember that the protocol is there and in place because of the unique circumstances of Northern Ireland. We've got to make sure it works in a good, fluid and flexible way so that it works for the people of Northern Ireland, because ultimately it only works if it is working for everybody across the community. It has to be something that is acceptable to the unionist and loyalist community as well, and to function that way. She talks about talks. Obviously, I've met with leaders on the executive as well as party leaders, do regularly and will continue to do so. The Prime Minister obviously has met with people in civic society and the business community around the protocol, but we actually do support the established bodies that have been set up, the JCC, etc., and the work we are doing through that to resolve these issues. And I'm glad to hear that she wants to see reduced checks. So I'm assuming retrospectively she supports the unilateral action that we took just a few weeks ago, and will support the work that the government is doing to ensure that we reduce these checks so the protocol works in the pragmatic way that it was always envisaged. Ultimately, I think we do come back to being united on the fact that the way forward, wherever we agree and disagree, is always through dialogue, never through violence.
Lydia Link. Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by thanking my right honourable friend for his statement and echo our thoughts with the Shadow Secretary of State. Our thoughts and prayers are with the injured PSNI officers and, of course, the vast majority of law-abiding residents who've been caught up in the recent thuggish criminal behaviour. Peace and prosperity, Mr Deputy Speaker, are, as my right honourable friend knows, two sides of the Good Friday Agreement coin. We know that there can be no prosperity without peace. But can I urge him to turbocharge with the executive the prosperity agenda, so to bring back into the fold those who might say, like those fictional Judeans in the film, what has the GFA ever done for us? We must focus on prosperity as much as peace.
The chairman of the Select Committee, my honourable friend, makes a very good point. He's absolutely right, not just in his admiration of cinema, but in his recognition of the fact there is work that we need to do. And I share his view of cinema in that respect. One of the things I'm looking forward to doing is working through the delivery of the New Deal programme, the 400 million that we have secured on top of the city and growth deals and the investment through New Deco, New Approach. And that is very specifically looking at how we help Northern Ireland benefit from and take forward the opportunities that are there in the years ahead. Working with the executive, obviously, as well, through the block grant, the 15 billion that they have, to make sure that we are creating opportunity, both in skills for the future. As I said, social fabric is part of that. I passionately feel that integrated education has to be an integral part of this for the future, to bring people together, but also to make sure that people are getting that really good education and that the economy is growing and thriving. And one of the things that those of us who spend time in Northern Ireland can always see is the entrepreneurial spirit and the ability to see an opportunity and drive forward in a positive way, which is great for the economy, creates jobs, and as we come out of COVID, as I say, I think that means that Northern Ireland economically can have a really bright future.
Mr Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his notice, his statement, and associate myself with the remarks of both front benches in their condemnation of the violence that we have sadly seen. Particularly my thoughts are with those who have been injured in the disturbances, particularly those in the emergency services who have been working hard to keep their communities safe. Now, the disorder that we've seen in recent days represents, for those of us who grew up with strong memories of the Troubles, scenes which we thought we had left behind for good, and we do not strengthen communities by encouraging criminality and disorder within them. And I'm clear we can all agree how sickening it was to see young children being encouraged in acts of violence by their elders who have lived through that cycle of violence themselves. But moving on from where we are is going to require a number of things. It's going to require respect for the law and those who enforce it, whether that's the officers of the PSNI, the leadership of the PSNI, or the prosecution service. And all must be supported fully in dealing with criminality and maintaining public order in a way which is consistent, fair and proportionate across all sections of Northern Ireland. But above all, it's going to require leadership, integrity, honesty and respect from politicians. And there has, sadly, to date, been a dearth of some of those qualities on show in the way that the protocol has been negotiated and implemented, and the price that is being paid for that now, I think, is all sadly too clear. This was a protocol which was entered into freely by the UK government, and it's here to stay, and surely we can agree that the only route to amending it is through trust and goodwill on all sides. Now, if the great success of the Good Friday Agreement was in ensuring that the symbols of a border in the island of Ireland disappeared, then if we can all agree that there is now a trade border, we can surely agree that the symbolism of that matters. So one practical step, which I've raised with the Secretary of State before, would be to introduce a realignment of sanitary and phytosanitary checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which would remove some of the more snagging aspects of the current protocol and the difficulties and the symbolism that that causes. Will the Secretary of State, in his discussions with all partners in this process, continue discussions on looking at whether or not that is something that we can do to smooth the passage of the protocol, and will he agree to work with other devolved governments which this would also impact upon?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman that he certainly agree with, obviously, and share and appreciate the remarks he's made in the first part of his statement. I think we also just need to be very alert to that. He's spent a fair part of the question referring to the protocol. First of all, I think we've got to be really cautious around talking about the protocol and tensions and issues and views that people have about the Northern Ireland Protocol, as valid as they may be, are not and should never be in any way allowed to be argued that they in any way legitimise what we saw the other week. I think, as others have said, is right that any disagreement on that is something we work through in a political and democratic way. So I think we've also got to be very wary of the simplicity of thinking that what happened the other week was over one particular issue. As I think I've outlined, as the Honourable Lady outlined, it was a multifaceted set of issues. I would say to him that I do recognise the issues that are there from the outworking of the protocols we've seen in the first part of this year. That is something we have committed that we want to deal with. We're very clear that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the UK, an integral part of the UK customs territory. The protocol was put in place primarily because obviously the EU have a clear focus on protecting their single market. Obviously our focus is on making sure that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is respected in all of its strands, and that does include East-West, and that's why we're very clear that whilst we want to ensure that goods that are moving into the EU through the Republic of Ireland are properly dealt with, goods that are moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain are unfettered as they are, and goods moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland can do so freely and flexibly in a pragmatic approach.
Video link. Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I associate myself with the preceding comments that were made about our friend and colleague, Dame Cheryl Gillen, and her sad passing. I also associate myself with the support expressed to the police service in Northern Ireland, those affected in the troubles in recent days. And in view of the serious events in Northern Ireland and the underlying causes, does my right honourable friend agree that there is a need for the European Union, the Republic of Ireland and the UK to be pragmatic and practical in coming to an agreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol? And furthermore, does the Secretary of State believe that the European Union fully understood the potential implications when it invoked Article 16 and the risks of doing so of that protocol?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I hope you'll excuse me just joining my right honourable friend in his comments about the late Cheryl Gillen. It's the first chance I've had at this dispatch box to say that she became a very, very good friend to me over a period, as I think you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, know full well a short while ago, and she will be very, very sorely missed by all. Look, my right honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of the situation. I think it is right, as I said earlier on. And I'm encouraging our friends and colleagues in the European Union, particularly with Maros Šefčovič as Vice President and his team, to really take the opportunity as restrictions allow, whether it's virtually at the moment and as restrictions ease by being present in Northern Ireland, to understand the implications of the outworking of the protocol, the practical supply line issues that we obviously took actions on recently, and also to understand this real issue of identity that the Loyalist Unionist community feel. Obviously, the outwork of the protocol affects everybody in Northern Ireland. It's not a constitutional issue in that sense. Whatever part of the community somebody's from, some of those outworkings for consumers and businesses have an impact. But this issue of identity for unionists and loyalist people in Northern Ireland is very real, and there is no doubt that was intensified after the action the EU took around Article 16. And I think it is important that while the EU recognise that was a mistake, that they fully take the time to understand the long-term implications that has had, and why it is so important that we work together to find pragmatic, proper solutions.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We condemn the violence. It is not justified, and attacking police officers in this way is wrong, and our thoughts and prayers are with the police officers who have been injured, and we thank them and their colleagues for their courage and determination in impartially applying the rule of law. But the Honourable Member for Sheffield Healy put her finger on it when she said that the issue here is trust. And taking the peace process forward has to be built on trust. That trust was broken in relation to the findings on the Bobby Story funeral, and it has undermined people's trust and confidence in policing and justice in Northern Ireland. And there is a two-tier policing system in the eyes of some, and that needs to be addressed. And importantly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there was a breach of trust in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol and creating barriers to trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland that we were told would not happen and have happened. And they undermine the sense of identity and the place of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. What is the Secretary of State going to do with the Northern Ireland political parties to address the issues around policing and justice, and crucially, to replace this protocol with something better that restores Northern Ireland's place fully within the internal market of the United Kingdom?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, as the right honourable gentleman knows, obviously we took unilateral action just a few weeks ago to ease some of the issues, and issues that would have been made matters even more difficult, as I suggested at the time. And I think is now very clear they were the right actions to take. And I think through that, people can see that we are determined to deal with some of the problems and the issues there in the protocol. My right honourable friend, the Noble Lord Frosty, is obviously working through the correct established bodies with the JCC, etc., with our partners in the EU to come to and work out a proper solution that is a long-lasting solution in terms of those challenges around the protocol. He's absolutely right as well. As I said in my opening remarks around the issue of people perceiving that things have been, not everybody has been treated equally in terms of the implications of the rules around coronavirus. And the Bobby Story funeral is a very clear example of that, and the decision that came through just a few days before this in the days before the violence got to the point that it did. He's absolutely right. There is a very important role for the PSNI and the policing board to be working with communities to restore and build that trust. It's something I've been talking to the Chief Constable about. As he knows, I've been talking to the parties on the executive about. I think everybody's very alert to whatever anybody's view of what happened around the funeral. The very real fact is that the decision that was made has had a very substantial impact, and there is work that the various agencies and bodies, the PSNI and the Policing Board, need to do to reconnect with communities, to show communities that there is that they are there, the PSNI is there for the safety and protection of everybody across the entire community of Northern Ireland.
Media Link, John Redwood.
I strongly support all that the government and opposition have said about the violence. As the Northern Ireland Protocol stresses the need to maintain Northern Ireland's integrated place in the United Kingdom's internal market, will the UK government now ensure the easy and free movement of all goods from GB to Northern Ireland that are not at risk of going to the Republic? Shouldn't a good move as easily from Liverpool to Belfast as from Liverpool to Birmingham? And shouldn't that be under the direct control of the UK authorities?
Well, I welcome the Right Honourable Jenton's comments around the violence, as others have said, and he's absolutely right. What he has outlined in terms of the position that we need to get to is exactly where we want to get to. Obviously, we want to do that in partnership and agreement with our friends and partners in the EU, and that work is what we are doing at this very moment.
Sir Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. For years, the government has been warned that peace in Northern Ireland was a delicate and fragile thing, and that it was not to be taken for granted. And the fact that we have reached this point, I think, illustrates sadly only too well the recklessness of the position of the Prime Minister in particular with regard to the position of Northern Ireland and our departure from the European Union. This is not the first time in the last 23 years that we have found ourselves in peril. And in previous occasions it has taken the Prime Minister of the day to step up to the plate. The symbolism and demonstrating leadership is what's necessary. His predecessors have done it. Will he do it now?
Well, when the Honourable Gentleman refers, from my part, absolutely, that is the work that we are doing both with the parties and civic society and business leaders in Northern Ireland, both myself and the Prime Minister, who has been involved in this all the way through, has had a consistent focus on ensuring that we are delivering for the people of Northern Ireland, actually over the entire period, not obviously just the last few days, although he has obviously been involved over the last few days in his conversations with the Taoiseach, as well, not my conversations with the Irish Foreign Minister. But he does make, one Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point around the Good Friday Agreement. I think it is something we always need to remind ourselves. The Good Friday Agreement has three strands. We must resist the temptation that some people put on it to see the Good Friday Agreement through simply one strand of North-South. East-West and the Northern Ireland strands are hugely important, and one of the things we've got to do is make sure we are delivering on the East-West part of the Good Friday Agreement, so the Good Friday Agreement is applied and working in all of its strands.
Video link. Maria Miller.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I add my condolences to those expressed earlier and send them to Cheryl Gillen's family following her sad death last week. She was seen on our side of the House as the mother of our side of the chamber. She was a generous lady, she was kind, and we will really miss her. Mr Deputy Speaker, people will be listening to these exchanges today, concerned that this unacceptable violence and disorder could mean yet more delay to seeing the implementation of the laws which we agreed in this place over a year ago on access to abortion and abortion aftercare in Northern Ireland, healthcare which is routinely available in the rest of the UK. Can my right honourable friend assure the House that he will not be distracted from the steps he set out a few weeks ago, and that there will be no more delay in giving women and girls in Northern Ireland the same rights as women and girls throughout the rest of the UK when it comes to access to abortion and abortion aftercare?
Yes, I can give that assurance, and I would just go a little bit further. Even in the conversation I was having in Belfast yesterday with community groups and political leaders, everybody is very determined on continuing to deliver for people of Northern Ireland in the widest sense through the New Decade New Approach Agreement, as well as I say, obviously we will not be distracted from delivering on our promises and the actions we outlined just a few weeks ago on abortion. And I think this does come back to remembering that what we saw last week for those few days, and hopefully we don't see a recurrence of it, we can all have a part to play in encouraging a calm approach to disagreements, but we must not be deterred from the wider work to deliver for Northern Ireland by the action of criminals and thugs and hooligans.
Video link, Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, particularly his comments on integrated education? But can I press him on strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement, which he has talked about? Has he had discussions with his friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, about and the Irish government about having another British-Irish intergovernmental conference, which is so crucial to that relationship across these islands? We haven't had one for nearly 2 years.
Well, the Honourable Lady does make a fair point around how things... And obviously we had the British-Irish Council has met regularly and continues to do so. It met just in November last year. It's met regularly annually. The British-Irish Intergovernmental Council, which didn't meet from February 2007 through to July 2018, has met 3 times since then. We will, of course, look for the appropriate time for the next meeting of the BIIGC, especially in the context of ensuring strengthening the bilateral relationship between the UK and Ireland. Now that we have left the EU, I've spoken to the Irish Foreign Minister about that myself, but we also need to be very clear. Policing is a devolved matter and therefore is outside the remit of the BIIGC.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and his continuing commitment to resolve the issues thrown up by the Northern Ireland Protocol. And with one of the many reasons for the recent unacceptable disorder being that one side of the community undoubtedly feels their concerns are not being listened to, not least by those in the European Union, what representations will my right honourable friend make to those outside Northern Ireland to listen more carefully to the concerns of all communities in Northern Ireland?
My honourable friend makes a really important point that I think is incumbent upon all of us, and speaking about it in this House here today, colleagues across the House have influence and relationships across the EU to make that case very widely that it is important the EU does understand why that issue of identity, the tensions that we are seeing in the Loyalist and Unionist community are there over some of the things that have happened earlier this year, as we've already outlined. There is, as I say, fundamentally a multifaceted, complex set of reasons behind last week. There is work for all of us to do to be a part in taking that forward. But he's absolutely right. We all have a part to play to ensure that people do understand those complications and nuances and sensitivities in Northern Ireland.
Video link. Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the Northern Ireland Secretary that he will deserve the support of this whole House and indeed the people across these 2 islands for every effort he makes to bring politicians in Northern Ireland, in Dublin and of course here in the UK, in Great Britain together. But the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley is right in pointing out at the moment the lack of trust is palpable. If he wants to make sure that the European Union understands the situation in Northern Ireland, if he wants to bring people together, it isn't just symbolism for him to say to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has got to be visible at this time. If the Prime Minister himself is to give the kind of leadership we have expected from Prime Ministers in the past, we need brave decisions. It's up to the Prime Minister now to step forward and give that kind of leadership.
Well, look, I would say to the honourable gentleman, who I know has got a long-held and strong passion for Northern Ireland and has always worked to ensure that the people of Northern Ireland are well supported and has done so in a very collegiate way. I would just say to him that he's absolutely right about bringing people together. That's what we have been doing. As I say, I've outlined this afternoon. I think it's important we encourage our friends and partners around the world, including the EU, to do that. The Prime Minister has been integrally involved with Northern Ireland and actually was himself there just a couple of weeks ago.
Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement? But I have to say I'm disappointed at the lack of any acceptance of culpability from his own government and how they have dealt with the Brexit issue from the start and how they haven't been honest with the unionist population in Northern Ireland. Church leaders have asked us to come together to deal with this crisis in our peace process, and despite what the Secretary of State has said, policing may be devolved, but peace is not devolved. We all have a responsibility to deal with this. Why will the Secretary of State and his government not convene the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference?
Well, in terms of the last comment, I would just say to the Honourable Gentleman, I want to have a look back through Hansard later to just reread my remarks, because that's actually not what I said. Actually, quite the opposite. I've spoken to the Irish government, and as I say to you, I would just suggest he has a look at what I actually said. I think it's also very misleading to try and, as I said earlier on, legitimise or simplify even, and I appreciate it's not legitimising to be fair, but to simplify what we've seen over the last few weeks and the tensions around Brexit. As I think many of us know, and as I know he knows because this was outlined to him by the Chief Constable with myself at the end of last week, there is a multifaceted set of issues, not least of all actually in some cases some of the brilliant work the PSNI have done cracking down on crime, but some of that has been rehearsed today. I have faith in the Northern Ireland Executive, including the ministers, one of which is a member of his party, to do their work to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. I think having come together just a few weeks before COVID came upon us all last year, to see the Executive work through the last year in the way that they have, staying together and working together for the people of Northern Ireland, has been a phenomenal achievement and a huge credit to all of those involved in doing that. I have faith in them to do the work that is devolved to them. I will continue to support them in that and to give that support to the PSNI to do the job that is there for them to do and that they are focused on doing to keep everybody in Northern Ireland safe.
Anthony Higginbottom.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend said, the reason for the scenes we've seen over recent weeks are multifaceted, and that means there's not a single solution to the problems either. There will have to be a holistic approach. So could he just confirm that he's finding ways to bring together all partners, not just PSNI, not just the Northern Ireland Executive, but the Irish Government, the European Union, as well as civil society, to come up with a holistic strategy for how we can bring peace back to the streets of Belfast?
Dave?
Well, my honourable friend is right about the multifaceted situation, and there is work we've got to do. We've touched on integrated education. We've got to make sure there's a stronger and more connected relationship in some communities with the police themselves, with the political parties in Northern Ireland themselves, across the communities. That's something that's come through very clearly in the engagement I've had, not just in the last few days, but over the last period with people across various community and civic groups. And as I said earlier on, we will of course look for an appropriate time for a future meeting of the BIIGC, particularly, as I say, in light of that redevelopment and strengthening of the bilateral relationship between ourselves and the Irish Government now that we have left the EU.
Biddy Link, Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I, at the outset, say that my thoughts and prayers are with the officers injured in recent days. Whilst all right-minded people will condemn any violence or threat of violence in Northern Ireland, whether now or in the past, does the Secretary of State accept that the anger in the unionist community goes far beyond those who have taken to the streets in recent days? Will the Secretary of State take any opportunity to point out to his Irish or European colleagues whose belligerent approach has exacerbated the difficulties that the rigorous implementation of the protocol is not only inconsistent with the Belfast Agreement, but is also, even before it is being implemented in full, causing societal difficulties in Northern Ireland? With or without the necessary flexibility being shown by the European Commission, can the Secretary of State confirm that the Government will fulfil the Prime Minister's assurance in December 2019 that there would be no checks on goods going from Northern Ireland to GB or from GB to Northern Ireland?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady has very strongly and passionately outlined the point around this issue, around the sense of frustration and tension in Northern Ireland. Actually, I would say, talking to businesses, whether somebody is nationalist or unionist, they've had an impact from the outworkings of the protocol in terms of some of the issues that we have seen earlier this year. That is exactly why we're working with the business community and with civic society across the whole community of Northern Ireland to make sure that we are finding sensible solutions to this. We would like to work on that with our European partners, but she is right. The actions we saw, particularly the actions around Article 16, had a very acute impact in the sense of frustration, tension and anger across the unionist community. Thankfully, and she's absolutely right. We need to be very clear. By far, obviously, the very vast majority of people who have that anger are expressing that in the right way through their politicians, in a democratic sense of dialogue, to move things forward, and peaceful protest. That is absolutely right. We defend their right to do that. We will continue to engage on that, and as she rightly says, that does not at any point ever excuse violence, and we need to be very clear about that. But we are determined to work through these issues and make sure that the protocol is one that can work for everybody in a sense that is pragmatic, flexible and free-flowing trade for GB into NI.
Media Link. Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I join in expressing my full support for the PSNI, including the Chief Constable. And the Secretary of State well knows my views on the importance of a UK-EU veterinary agreement to take the heat out of the protocol. The Secretary of State has rightly referred to the need to address deprivation and segregation. So in that regard, can I invite him to consider extending his government's Fresh Start funding, which is so important for the expansion of integrated education, and also to work with his ministerial colleagues to provide urgent clarity on the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is so important for local employability schemes.
Yeah, look, very happy to do that. In fact, we organised a meeting just recently for the executive ministers with ministers and officials from government and the Department of Communities and Local Government to talk through the schemes, not just the Shared Prosperity Fund, but the Community Renewal Fund and others, because there is substantial extra funds available this year for Northern Ireland as we are moving towards that Shared Prosperity Fund. And of course, as I set out earlier on today, there will be part of the 400 million of New Deal money is particularly going to be focused on work around social fabric, potentially around integrated education. And I'm really keen to engage to make sure that that money is being put into areas where it has the most beneficial impact in a way that's positive for people on the ground in Northern Ireland.
Media Link. Nigel Mills.
Thank you. Would the Secretary of State agree that the democratic institutions in Northern Ireland have a key role to play in ending this violence? And would he therefore urge all the parties not to take the step of suspending the institutions as we've seen in recent years, and to keep talking to find a solution to take Northern Ireland forward?
Look, the short answer is yes, but I just want to stress as well, the main political parties who form the executive in Northern Ireland are all in the place that he outlined, working together. That's why it was really good to see last week them come together with a joint statement around this. One of the things that unifies, and you've got 5 different political parties in a power sharing arrangement in a devolved authority. Obviously, they will disagree on things from time to time. What they absolutely agree on is their right to disagree and to do so in a democratic, peaceful way, which they have worked together on very well since the reformation after the New Decade, New Approach last year, and I hope they will continue to do that. And I say my engagement with them all at the moment, I'm confident that they will, and it's the right thing to do. It's certainly what the people of Northern Ireland want to see.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I associate myself with all of the remarks of the Shadow Secretary of State on the complex situation in Northern Ireland. Notwithstanding that, just 5 weeks ago, the Prime Minister said that the Northern Irish Protocol must not place barriers of any kind down the Irish Sea. So can the Secretary of State explain to this House why it was that the Prime Minister negotiated an agreement that did exactly that? And does he accept that the gap between what the Prime Minister says in Northern Ireland and what he does has contributed to a serious collapse in trust, which now requires urgent prime ministerial attention?
Well, I would just say to the Honourable Lady that it's interesting that in talking about a complex and multifaceted situation, she just goes straight to talking about Brexit, which again I think just highlights where Labour are so far behind where the general public are and finding a way to move forward on delivering on this. And actually, as we've been very clear from the beginning, the protocol is there because of the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland. It has to work in a way that works for people across the communities in Northern Ireland, for the whole of Northern Ireland, in a flexible, pragmatic way. She talks about the Prime Minister's involvement. Obviously, he has been involved, not just in the last few days, but consistently through this process, and has been very clear about our determination, his determination, exactly what the Noble Law Frost is working on at the moment through the JCC and working with my department as well, to ensure that we do deliver an outcome that means that those products do flow in a flexible manner, because the protocol is there. As I said earlier on, we understand the EU has obviously got that great concern about protecting its single market. We've got to make sure that the protocol respects the Good Friday Agreement in all 3 strands, including East-West.
Felicity Backham.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the violence that we have seen is utterly unacceptable and that the only way that we can make progress on these issues is through peaceful and inclusive dialogue?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Obviously, we need to also understand what is it that's all of these issues that have come together to lead people to think that violence is the solution completely unacceptably, to be able to work through that with the political parties and the community groups in Northern Ireland. But she's absolutely right. There is no excuse for what we saw the other week. It was utterly reprehensible. And as I said before, and as others have said quite rightly, our thoughts are with the police, whose focus is on keeping people safe.
Steve Bonner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The abdication of any responsibility for the scenes that we've seen in the streets of the Northern Ireland by this government is actually shameful, and by this Minister it's shameful. The Prime Minister made consistent promises that there would be no border down the Irish Sea. The Prime Minister also persistently threatened to break international law, repeatedly undermining the Good Friday Agreement. And the nature of politics towards the north of Ireland under this government as a consequence of Brexit has been at best regretful. Does the Minister, and I have my concerns, does he understand the complexities, and will he take responsibility for the repeated failures of his party in government?
Well, I would just say to the Honourable Gentleman, if he actually looks at what I've said this afternoon, I think I've proven quite the opposite in acknowledging the issues that have multifaceted led to the violence we saw the other week. Not that that excuses or legitimises in any way the reprehensible behaviour we saw from some and the encouragement of young people, which I find particularly despicable the other week. But I would just say to the Honourable Gentleman, it's good to see, if I heard his question correctly, that he is now fully supporting us in ensuring that there are no borders. And I therefore look forward to his support if we have to take further action, and any further action we take to deliver on that in the way we promised the people of Northern Ireland we would, in delivering a pragmatic and flexible approach to the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement has brought untold benefits to Northern Ireland over the past 23 years? And it's therefore the Belfast Good Friday Agreement which must be the basis for future cooperation and political engagement.
Absolutely. We have seen an economy that is now a vibrant, exciting economy, whether it's on fintech, renewable energy, cyber, creative arts, advanced engineering and manufacturing. Wherever you go in Northern Ireland, you'll see entrepreneurship and opportunity in a way that I think is a testament to the phenomenal success of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I want to see that continue to deliver on. I'm absolutely passionate about making sure we deliver on that for the people of Northern Ireland, and we do so by respecting and delivering on and working with everything and every part of the Good Friday Agreement.
Video link. Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I convey my thoughts for those PSNI officers who have been injured over the last week. They serve our community valiantly and often become the casualty when politics does not work. I also wish to commend the leadership shown by my colleagues in my constituency of East Belfast and community leaders who have ensured that our part of the city has remained calm. The Secretary of State's right to caution against legitimising violence. It should not happen. Violence is wrong. But I think when we talk of dialogue, I hope the Secretary of State will agree that the serious issues that have been raised should not be ignored. I hope the Secretary of State will appreciate that there are still too many politicians in Northern Ireland who not only dismiss the concerns, but denigrate those in our community who make them. And if we want to see politics work, and I do, we want to see that constitutional politics works, and it should, we need to see the tangible results of all the flexibilities and resolutions for the injurious imposition we are facing in Northern Ireland.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and I commend him and, as he said, his colleagues in the area who have been working closely with their communities and giving that support that the community groups, communities themselves, and indeed the PSNI have benefited from. He's also absolutely right. We need to make sure that we are not afraid of the fact that we do need to, all of us, make sure we are properly engaging across the entire community of Northern Ireland, and with anybody who is looking to find a peaceful solution, to use dialogue, to condemn violence, and wants to be part of taking Northern Ireland forward in a positive way, is somebody we should be engaging with. And it is absolutely right that we take the time to have those difficult conversations sometimes when they're there, even around issues where we disagree, to make sure that we can understand and look at how we can deliver on things in a way that works for everybody. In short, he's absolutely right.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Further to what my honourable friends have said about the Northern Ireland Protocol, does my right honourable friend agree the reckless invocation of Article 16 by the EU for however short a period without thought of the consequences has contributed to the political tensions that we now see in Northern Ireland?
Stay.
Look, my honourable friend is correct. To be fair, the EU have recognised the mistake, they've acknowledged that mistake, apologised for it, and obviously they stepped back from the brink. But the action of taking that definitely had an impact, something that the civic representatives from civic society made clear to the Vice President. That's why I think it is important that our colleagues and friends in the EU take some time to really understand some of the nuances and complexities of the communities in Northern Ireland, and particularly that sense of identity in the Unionist and Loyalist community, and why that action not just had an impact that night, but has had an impact that's had a lasting effect on people's sense of identity.
Video link. Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Given the government are committed to seeking an agreement with the EU on veterinary standards, repeated by the Secretary of State for DEFRA, can the Secretary of State confirm that this is something ministers are pursuing in the joint committee? And does he support such an agreement that would reduce checks and red tape and would lower tension in the long term?
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right in the sense that both through the Joint Committee and the work of the Noble Lord Frost, but also through my colleague, the Secretary of State of DEFRA, and other departments where relevant, all of us across government are working on the various issues to iron out these challenges and some of the problems we have seen with the outworking of the protocol in the first few months of this year, so we do get these things resolved. And obviously our intention, our aim and our focus is on doing so by agreement and in agreement with our friends and partners in the EU.
Video link. Mary Kelly Foy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Social media has been used to lure young people to interfaces between communities, inflaming the crisis with provocative messages and fake news. Will the Secretary of State make very clear that social media giants such as Facebook and WhatsApp cannot wash their hands of responsibility and have a duty to act to prevent their platforms being used to incite violence?
The Honourable Lady makes a very good point. It's another example of, even in an extended discussion as we're having this afternoon, there are so many more issues that have been involved over the last few weeks. And she's absolutely right. Social media and people being subject to fake news and bot accounts, etc. All of these things have played a part. We are working with the social media companies who both with the PSNI and more widely across the executive and UK government with them. And she's absolutely right. I would just say to people to be very cautious and wary of these things, and that kind of activity on social media is something that doesn't help anybody. And yes, the social media companies themselves, digital media companies, do have a part to play in helping to ensure that that kind of messaging is not spreading and risking more violence anywhere on the streets of the United Kingdom.
Video link or audio link. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State indicated that there was widespread condemnation of the violence of the past week or so, and he is absolutely right. That wasn't always the case, but thankfully is the case now. There are two outstanding problems that need to be resolved of the utmost urgency. One is the Northern Ireland Protocol, which he has alluded to. The other is the position of the Chief Constable. Will he recommit himself to ensuring that these two obstacles to progress can be dealt with in a satisfactory way in order to take us forward peacefully and democratically?
Secretary of State.
Well, as I've outlined this afternoon and previously in the House, we have a clear focus on the work to move things forward on the protocol in a pragmatic and flexible way so that it is working and delivering for people in Northern Ireland without hindrance or problem. And I know that the Chief Constable himself is very much focused on working with, and his entire focus is on the safety and security of people in Northern Ireland, and I support him in that work.
Video link. Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm of a generation that remembers what discord in Ireland meant for people here on the mainland.
I remember my mum scared to go to work in London because of the bombs that were going off, scared to go to work in London. So what would the Secretary of State say today to those like my mum who would not understand how the government has allowed the current situation to arise?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm sure the honourable gentleman will also be aware. Obviously, we have seen, sadly and inexcusably, violence in parts and in pockets across the UK over the course of the last few months, both in London, Bristol and elsewhere, none of which is acceptable, none of which we should see. We should all be working, wherever it is in the UK, to support the local police, support the local communities to bring an end to it and a return to calm and proper dialogue. I would suggest that he should I would caution him against comparing what we saw the other week to what was seen some decades ago. That's something nobody should return to. The people in Northern Ireland deserve better. It's not what we saw last week, and it certainly isn't what anybody wants to see return in the future. But we all have a job to do to return, to ensure that calmness that is there now remains, and we're working together in a proper democratic sense of dialogue.
Video link, Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is a denial, sir, not to acknowledge the consequences of decisions taken by both front benches and imposed in Northern Ireland that have now caused seismic, societal, economic and community breakdowns. And of course, that is the Northern Ireland Protocol. And we're witnessing the breakdown today. And all the condemnation in the world, and I condemn the violence, but all the condemnation in the world will not make that violence go away until actions are taken. The causes are not COVID-19. Seriously, the causes are not the Bobby Story funeral. That's the straw that broke the camel's back. The Secretary of State knows that the protocol lies at the heart of this because the identity of Ulster is at stake as a result of the protocol. And I fear a continuing downward spiral unless the Secretary of State takes action. And the key action he could take is to invoke Article 16, take control of this situation and address the downturn in societal.
Sorry, Ian, I think we've got the gist of the point you're making. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yes, I think I understood the point that the honourable gentleman was making, and I would say to him, as I outlined earlier on, he's referenced a few of the things that I noted earlier on, and I've noted earlier on this afternoon, even in my opening remarks, about some of these challenges and his point about breaking the camel's back. Equally, the issues around the protocol in the first part of this year. And that is why we took the unilateral action we took, which I know you supported a few weeks ago. We've been very clear we would take the action we need to take to make sure this works for Northern Ireland. And that does include, and actually our focus is on doing that through the proper channels, working with our friends and partners in the EU to get an agreeable solution that means it can work for our friends and partners in the EU, who we obviously trade with, as well as the people across the United Kingdom, and the ability for people to have that trade from GB to NI in the way that we all want to see.
Video link, Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As the Honourable Member for North Antrim has just said, the protocol is at the heart of this issue. The Secretary of State knows that there were only three options: all UK alignment with the Customs Union and the single market, a land border between North and South, or a border in the Irish Sea. The Prime Minister chose the sea border, but then he promised it would not involve the checks that he signed up to in the protocol. Either he didn't understand the agreement he signed, or he didn't care about telling the truth. Which was it?
Well, having outlined this earlier today, it's interesting that members of the bench opposite continue to want to talk about nothing else other than leave the EU. And I think that does highlight this lack of connection with the people who want to move forward. And as we have said, we want to make sure that this works for the people of Northern Ireland. And I think it's very clear. One of the things we have said consistently, the Prime Minister outlined, that the protocol itself is there for the unique circumstances of the situation in Northern Ireland. It's there because it allows and recognises that the EU want to protect their single market. We respect that position. They want to protect their single market. That's about protecting the EU for goods that are moving through Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland and therefore the EU. We are determined to ensure that we are delivering on all strands of the Good Friday Agreement, not just one of them as that would otherwise outline. And that means recognising, as the protocol itself says, and is clear about not only that it won't disrupt the everyday lives of people in their communities, but that it will respect and recognises the integral market of the United Kingdom. And Northern Ireland is an integral and fixed part of the United Kingdom customs territory. We are determined to ensure that it remains so and that we get those products moving freely. That doesn't mean that we absolutely recognise the need and the desire for the EU to be make sure the goods moving into the EU via the Republic of Ireland are properly dealt with. But that is very different to having the amount of goods and the challenges that we are seeing for all goods moving to Northern Ireland from Great Britain. And as we've been clear, we will fix that.
Good evening. Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The wholly unacceptable disorder was in parts driven by the non-tariff barriers on exports from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. I understand the government is planning the full implementation of border checks on imports from the European Union from October onwards. Will this include non-tariff barriers on exports from Northern Ireland to Great Britain?
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman could look at the legislation we passed last year that ensures we have Northern Ireland unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to the market of the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland to Great Britain. We legislated for that, we've delivered on that, and we will continue to work to ensure we get the equally flexible and free flow of trade for GB to NI as I've outlined this afternoon.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank and agree with the Secretary of State? I know we all agree that violence is unjustified and is unjustifiable. It will break lives and homes, but won't fix the problems. Democratic politics is the only solution, and politics must be seen to work. The overwhelming majority of good law-abiding folks in Northern Ireland will never pick up a stone or throw a petrol bomb. We support the police and the rule of law. The Secretary of State, the Northern Ireland Protocol has disrupted business, has created problems on the streets. People are dismayed, anger, the frustration is boiling over. Some of them feel, and indeed we probably all feel, as second-class citizens. At the same time, 2,000 people attended the Bobby Story funeral. We buried our mother-in-law in October last year, 25 at the funeral. So will the Secretary of State join me in rejecting two-tier policing, where there is one rule for us but another rule for Sinn Féin? And will the Secretary of State recognise the flawed Northern Ireland Protocol is disrupting peace rather than cementing stability?
Secretary of State.
I think I agree in large part with what the Honourable Gentleman has said, and it's why it is important for us to be working to find solutions in terms of how the outworkings of the protocol have had an impact on the ground. And he's absolutely right, that impact in terms of people's sense of identity. I absolutely understand, and I welcome his condemnation of the violence we saw the other week. And in terms of policing, I think it is important that people are clear that the PSNI's work is to be there to support and keep safe and protect people of all communities on an equal basis. People need to have trust and faith in that, and the PSNI, I know, are focused on looking at what they can do to make sure they're delivering on that. It is simply unacceptable that, particularly with a set of regulations, that any one community should be in a position where they believe they can see that there has been a difference in treatment from one part of a community to another, particularly on something so sensitive with family funerals over the last year or so. I absolutely understand the frustration people have got. I know the PSNI do as well, and they're working to ensure that people are clear and can have the confidence and trust that they are there to work for people across the whole community of Northern Ireland equally, fairly and properly to keep us all safe.
I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement today and responding to 31 questions in over 1 hour. We're going to suspend now for 3 minutes for the cleaning of the dispatch boxes, in order that after the 10-minute rule bill we can go straight into the Finance number 2 bill. So we'll suspend. Order!